So now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator and our guest for this evening. So it's going to be your turn in a minute here. Mellody Hobson is president of Ariel Investments, a money management firm where she is responsible for firm-wide management and strategic planning, overseeing all operations outside of research and portfolio management. Mellody is an advocate for financial literacy and is a regular CBS News contributor on financial issues. Mellody also serves on numerous boards, including DreamWorks Animation, SKG, the Estee Lauder Companies, and Starbucks. She is very civically involved here in Chicago, serving as chair of After School Matters, a not-for-profit that provides Chicago teens with high-quality, out-of-school time programs. She is a board member of the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art, the Chicago Public Education Fund, and Sundance Institute, where she has been appointed emeritus trustee. Mellody is an active member of the Economic Club, currently serving on the program committee, and we're delighted that she's agreed to moderate tonight's conversation. Tonight's honored guest speaker is Bob Iger, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of the Walt Disney Company, which represents the world's largest media company and many respected and beloved brands around the globe. His strategic vision for the Walt Disney Company focuses on three fundamental pillars: generating the best creative content possible, fostering innovation and utilizing the latest technology, and expanding into new markets around the world. During Bob's tenure, the Walt Disney Company has been recognized as one of the most reputable companies in both America and the world by Forbes magazine for the last 8 years running. Bob himself has been named one of Fortune magazine's 25 most powerful people in business, one of the Top Gun CEOs by Forbes magazine, and the 2014 CEO of the Year by Chief Executive magazine. Bob serves on numerous boards, including Apple, the U.S.-China Business Council, the National September 11th Memorial and Museum, and the Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, Inc. And in June 2010, President Barack Obama appointed him to the President's Export Council, which advises the President on how to promote U.S. export jobs and growth. Bob's also a member of the Partnership for a New American Economy, a coalition of mayors and business leaders from across the United States that supports comprehensive immigration reform. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Bob Iger and Mellody Hobson.
I want to go back to the beginning. 24-year-old weatherman. Weatherman on local television.
Yes, I was a weatherman.
What were you thinking your life was going to be?
Well, I always had a desire to be a newscaster. And in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, it was all about being Walter Cronkite. And so that was my dream job. So I started out at the very bottom. I guess weather is the bottom. Where I worked had really bad weather. So I wasn't the most popular guy in the world.
Because you're a bad predictor? Or
well,
what?
It taught me how to give people bad news, I know that. And I discovered pretty early on that the career that I dreamed of, at least in terms of being a journalist, a television journalist, was not going to pan out the way I thought, because frankly, the feedback was not that great. I wasn't as talented as I thought I was. So I gave it up and I became a production assistant at ABC, actually at 23 in 1974. And so 41 years ago, I joined the company, which ultimately was bought by Disney in the mid-90s.
So you're a production assistant and you're just thinking, it's a job and I'm enjoying it?
Well, it was at least in television, which is where I wanted to work. I had no idea where it was going to take me. I didn't know really what I wanted to be at that point. But I showed up one day in the summer of 1974, eager to work, and I guess the rest is history. It's just, looking back, it's interesting because it's an odyssey of sorts in terms of the places I've been and the things I've seen, and the things I've been able to do. But in another sense, it just happened so fast that it's almost hard to, get a grasp of exactly how I got where I am today. Because it just happens, it's one day at a time, 1 week at a time, one job at a time, and suddenly you find yourself running the Walt Disney Company.
But the success, let's jump to today. From the weatherman to the CEO, you've been CEO since 2005. Mm-hmm. The results are stunning. They're breathtaking. Record stock price, record revenues, record EPS. I could go through the list. Your return under your tenure over 400%, the S&P 500 just over 100, pushing $107 a share in stock price. When you started, you were in the low 20s.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a phenomenal story, and yet I read you say that part of the reason you think that you were so successful is because you had the ability to embrace your failure. What failure have you seen in this story? I mean, I can't find any.
Well, over the course of a 41-year career, there are many things that I've done that didn't work out. And sometimes it was, through fault of mine, just some bad decision making. Fortunately, nothing that brought me down, I guess, in terms of my career. I'm a big believer in facing up to your shortcomings and admitting mistake. I was able to do that at a young age, where I remember working at ABC Sports, where I spent 13 years of my life, at one point running a program called Wide World of Sports, which is ironic because it was about the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat, and I experienced both. And making a big mistake, we had post-mortem meetings on a weekly basis to see what we did right and what we did wrong in the weekend sports, and something went terribly wrong, and the guy who was running ABC Sports at the time, Ron Arledge, said, "What happened?" And I said, "Well, it was my fault." And the room was silent, and I must have been 24 at the time, and I realized that no one in the room had ever said that. But I lived to tell it, I lived to tell more tales and to work more days, and that was very empowering. So I'm just a big believer in, look, you don't get where you are or where I am today by doing everything right. You learn a lot from your mistakes, and I'm perfectly willing to admit that they've occurred. And
so when you look at the last 10 years as CEO, is there something where you said, "Dang, I just missed this. I wish I had done this better," that you can think of?
You're putting a lot of pressure on me now. Well, sure. I mean, in the 10 years, we've had movies that have failed, things that I said yes to that didn't work, that caused, losses and that would be considered significant for most businesses. A lot of things that, what happens in jobs like this, you say no to a lot of things, and you're really glad looking back you said no to, and they kind of fade into the past, and you don't even remember what they were, and you say yes to things that produced wild success, and yes to things that didn't. I'll give you an example. We made a movie called Lone Ranger a few years ago, and it doesn't sound big, but I think it lost a couple $100 million. That's a big number. Fortunately, it was followed by our first Avengers movie, which made $1.6 billion or something like that quickly. So I owned up to the failure of Lone Ranger, but everybody forgot about it very fast.
So do you think
a lot. I remember, by the way, I put a show on at ABC, fond of talking about this. Somehow or another, I got it into my head that there was room in America in the 90s for a television musical, not a special or a movie, but a series. So I put a singing police musical on ABC called Cop Rock, which lasted for 11 weeks, and is gone. But you learn from these things, and I learned, by the way, that don't make a singing police musical. Haven't done another one. No one has done another one.
But isn't it particularly important in a creative environment to be careful about how you handle mistakes, because you need that creativity to thrive? So how do you deal with that with the people around you?
Well, that's a very good question. What happens in a company like ours that's driven by creativity, mostly, almost everything we do starts with a creative idea and finishes with a creative endeavor that either the world likes or doesn't like. And there's no science to it. I'm not actually a big believer in even trying to apply science to it, which in most cases involves research. It's people's passion, people's vision, creative vision, people's instinct, and the ability as a company to give people the chance to fulfill those creative visions or passions or instincts. And so with creativity comes the inevitable failure, or failures, and there have been a lot of them over the years, and you have to, in our business, learn how to tolerate those. If you don't, then people just don't want to create in the environment that you're giving them, because it can't be unforgiving. Creativity must be a forgiving environment, meaning forgiving of mistakes and failure. It has to be. Now, if someone fails time and time and time again, it doesn't mean they're never going to be successful again, but you start to think twice about giving them more room or more freedom. But for the most part, when there's failure, it can be followed very quickly by the same people with incredible success. And I like running an environment that recognizes the inevitability of failure, that recognizes the fact that usually, particularly on the creative side, it's the result of mistakes that are honest mistakes in a sense. I like giving people second chances for that, by the way, even on the business side. And not really wringing hands over it or second guessing it. I mean, I'm fine saying, well, why did we make Lone Ranger? Because in the end, I'm the only one that I could have stopped it. But I haven't beaten anybody up for making it. No one at the studio was told, don't make another Western or don't try that again. You know, it just doesn't make sense to do that. And so I like the fact that at Disney, it's okay to try new things, to bring us great ideas, and we all hope for the best, but not all, it doesn't work all the time, and it doesn't mean you can't come back and try again.
Well, I want to pick up on this idea of trying new things because technology, innovation, I mean, you were on the cover of Fortune as it related to technology. Some people think of you as being the chief technology officer of Disney because you don't have one individual, you have the CTOs within the business units. Mm-hmm. But technology has been a big driver of success for you at Disney. And I read in your most recent shareholder letter, you said there has been more transformational change in the last 5 years than in the 35 years of my career combined.
Yes.
And you were talking about innovation and technology. Now, you were super early in embracing these changes. I don't know if most people know that you were the first media company to give content to iTunes. Mm-hmm. You gave them reruns of Desperate Housewives and Lost.
Yeah.
And you saw something that, I mean, people were appalled at the time that you did that. I mean, you got heat from everyone. Mm-hmm. What are you seeing and what did you see then that has made this idea of technology, trying new things and innovation be so front and center for you?
Well, I'll go all the way back. I'll cover the decision with Apple, but I'll go all the way back to the time that I got this job, where I was asked by the board in a pretty rigorous succession process what direction I believe the company needed to go, what would my priorities be, what strategies would we deploy at the company to move it forward. And it was clear that, as I mentioned before, that from a value proposition perspective, it was mostly about creativity and storytelling. But we had been through a rough decade at the company. For a variety of reasons, we were challenged. And one of the things that we were not, I don't think, managing particularly well was the changes that were starting to occur in the media space created by technology. There were disruptions already visible, but not nearly as profound as I was quoted as saying in the last 5 years. And so a decision I thought needed to be made. Are we going to view technology as foe or friend? Would it be vast challenge or would it be vast opportunity? And it occurred to me that when I looked at the businesses and I looked at the history of the company, that technology really drove a lot of the company's success, even though storytelling was the headline. Going all the way back to Walt Disney's day and some of the technologies he used to make great animated films, as a for instance, or the technologies that were deployed in our theme parks early on, whether it was ride technology would be an example. And so I felt, part of it came from within, because I was just curious and a lover of technology, that we should declare technology as opportunity and friend and not the opposite. And I'll start with creativity, and George Lucas, your husband, is a perfect example of this. One of the world's great storytellers, yet one of the most effective people at using technology to tell stories in even more profound, greater, more dramatic ways. The technology is an unbelievable, when used well, is an incredibly powerful tool for the storyteller. Right. If a storyteller has a vision, often they will challenge a technologist to deliver the technology to help them fulfill that vision. You look at the visuals of Frozen and how you make snow in an animated fashion to make it look so, or ice to make it look so real, or you go all the way back
but
to
snow
Star
where
Wars
every flake is different in the movie.
Yes, and you go all the way back to Star Wars in 1977, and George had a vision and wanted to tell a story, and what he used from a technology standpoint enabled him to do that And had he not used technology, the story, I don't think would have been as memorable, as compelling, as effective as it was. So the first thing I thought we should do is let's embrace technology to tell better stories. That was one. Second, we were in a world that was starting to change in terms of access to storytelling and distribution of storytelling. Walt Disney was fond of saying that the purview of the storyteller would be much wider thanks to modern telecommunications and technology. And boy, was he right. So we were starting to see, like iTunes, these incredibly new, robust platforms that we could use to deliver our stories to more people in more places in a much more accessible way. And you think about the last, maybe not 5 years, but 10 years of mobile technology,
Right.
as a for instance, where that I could sit 2 weeks ago in a hotel room in Shanghai and watch an ESPN basketball game on my iPad, as a for instance. Or that you can watch, well, Desperate Housewives on a video iPod. So I thought, wow, how phenomenal is this going to be? We have all these great stories, and people are going to be able to enjoy them more often. So let's go where the people are, or where the technology could take us in terms of accessing more people. And so stepping up, and it was viewed as unbelievably disruptive, because what you're doing is you're challenging the current business models,
Right.
whether it's the motion pictures or the television affiliates, cable systems, satellite systems. The big box retailers had issues because of the sale of DVDs.
Right.
Everybody felt challenged, but I'm also a big believer in disrupt yourself. You're going to get disrupted anyway. You might as well do it to yourself, because one, you'll control it a little bit more, but you'll learn more about it faster, and those lessons will be really valuable. And of course, the third in terms of technology is getting closer to the customer, knowing who they are, giving them product that's more customized, more personalized, using personal information, obviously, to grow your business as well, really important. But just generally creating an intimacy with a customer that we never had before, that technology is enabling.
So you mentioned ESPN, 95 million households. 10 years from now, will there be cable?
Well, I think 10 years from now, people will get television channels, and you're already seeing this, in many different ways. One, they won't be as linear in nature. Two, you won't have to watch them, as is already the case, on a fixed television set in your home or in a bar or whatever, if it's sports. Three, you won't have to necessarily subscribe to cable or satellite. You could, and get a bundle of channels, and that could be fine for millions of people around the world. But there are many people that may not want it that way. They just may want a subscription just to sports or to ESPN, or they may want to watch just for a weekend or a week or a month.
And that
or
doesn't
whatever.
trouble you, the unbundling that is
No.
inevitable? Because ESPN gets the highest per sub, right?
Yes.
I mean, it
ESPN gets for the what are called expanded basic channels, ESPN gets the highest sub fees in the land, yes. And drives huge revenue from that because their primary reach to customers is through that multi-channel subscription model, which is great, and I hope it lasts forever, but it's not going to. There's too much disruption out there. It will last forever for a lot of people, but it's no longer a one-size-fits-all world where you can't just expect that everybody's going to accept everything the same way. There'll be people that want it completely differently, either for economic purposes or whatever. There's a lot more authority now in the hands of the customer than ever before. The creator and the distributor have less power or authority than they used to. That's because of technology. So embrace that change, allow it to happen. But it also, I think, has shaped us as a company in terms of the businesses that we're in particular, the focus on what I'll call branded content or entertainment. I think in a world with such disruption and with far more choice than ever before, there's an even greater value of brands. Now, you can't rest on brand laurels. You still have to nurture brands and feed them. But when you think about Disney today, and you think about Disney, you think about Lucas, Star Wars, you think about Pixar, you think about Marvel, you think about ESPN, those are really popular, powerful, valuable, primarily entertainment brands that people will want, provided we do the right things creatively forever, no matter how they get them, no matter where they get them. It's not going to be about the distribution mechanism or even the device. And I think that, so we believe that, and again, it's been fairly purposeful, that we're pretty well positioned to weather the, if you call it a storm of disruption. I try not to, even though I know I'm a weatherman, talk about it, refer to it as a storm as much as it is, change of climate.
Yeah. So you mentioned Star Wars. I can't overlook that one.
The first time I've been in a room with George where there was reference to Star Wars on a screen and he's sitting there, I must admit to being just a little nervous.
Well, we'll ask him later what he thinks. So tell me about, I remember the breakfast
You can tell the story.
in Disney World, that you were opening up a new ride, and the three of us went to a restaurant that was shut down.
The Brown Derby.
Brown Derby. We were the only three people in the restaurant.
I have that power. It's kind of
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. He
Over
said,
the
come
restaurant.
to breakfast, and there was no one in the restaurant. It was just a table for three people. So you said, if you ever sold the company, we'd buy it. And George said, you never know, maybe. He was kind of casual about it. You were kind of casual about it. We went on to the next subject. You had the Pirates of the Caribbean coming out that weekend, I remember. And we were talking about that. And now you own it. Tell me about the heat of Star Wars, because I was astounded by 110 million downloads of a trailer that was released on Thanksgiving, and then 40 million fan films that were made about the trailer. This is insane. I mean, I've never.
Well, look, it says greatness, really.
Does that does that worry you, or you think slam dunk?
No, I never think slam dunk, but I don't live my life worried. I care, but I don't worry. I have a very strong sense of I feel an obligation or a sense of great responsibility. But I think you have to start with, you think of the world or the businesses that we're in, and you could call them crown jewels, however you want to call them, but there are just a few things out there that not only have risen above over the years, but continue to remain above all the din, everything else, all of that choice. And it's usually because they are so great. And they come with, an extremely passionate fan base, and there's not only a love affair for them, but they're part of people's lives. And what Star Wars is, and I must say, it has exceeded my expectations. I had a strong sense, but I had no idea that it was this strong. Star Wars stands out. I've thought about it a lot. I've done a lot of there's been a lot of learning even since that breakfast. You think about the great mythology that's been created over centuries in this world, but you think about it, and you focus just on the 20th century. It's probably the greatest mythology that was created in the 20th century. And to have the opportunity to even be associated with it is just incredible as a company, as an individual, and in thinking about what the Walt Disney Company might be able to invest in. We think about growth a lot, and it goes back to my belief that it should all start with great creativity, great storytelling, and high-quality brands. There's really nothing that is on that level, really. And what the statistics that you cited, the number of downloads for a teaser trailer that I think was 88 seconds long, that came out just after Thanksgiving, I think speaks volumes. So I thought, we're lucky as a company that success has delivered a lot of capital, and we think hard. One of my big responsibilities as CEO is how do we deploy that capital to create more value for shareholders over time. But I also think about it in terms of how do we keep a company that was created by Walt Disney in 1923 and a brand relevant, not just successful, but relevant and popular, not just in the United States, but all over the world, which the global interest that we've had is in part because we believe that some of these stories in today's world can be told even more broadly than ever before. And so I thought if we ever had a chance to own Star Wars, I don't think there was anything else that came close. And so with a fair amount of nervousness, I will admit, I may not have seemed it at the breakfast, but I know we were reopening Star Tours, which is a very successful attraction that we had at Disneyland in California and at Disney World, and we also have it in other parks of the world, Tokyo and France. And I knew George was going to be there to dedicate it, so I decided to go down and dedicate it with him because I thought I'd have an opportunity to sit with George, who I've known since the mid-90s, going back to ABC putting on a show called Young Indiana Jones, and just broach the subject that if he ever had a thought about selling a company that I knew was very much a part of him, that we would be interested. I thought we would not only be a good steward for the brand and the storytelling, just generally be a good home, and that we would respect it because it deserved it. Very, very obviously, very hard thing. It's part of your life now. And I took it really seriously, and as you know, George and I talked again some 6 to 8 or 9 months later. I guess after he thought about it more, it's his story to tell too. And we worked out a deal that led to the acquisition. And when I think about the things that I've been able to do in this job, buying Pixar from Steve Jobs in 2006, and buying Marvel in 2009, and buying Lucas in 2012, and the story's yet to be told really about our stewardship of Star Wars, because the first movie will be out in December, and so we haven't proven
But the other two
good
have
or
gone
bad.
great.
The other
Pixar
two
has
have,
gone
the
great,
other two
and
have,
Marvel has been a huge success.
it has, and they far
Huge.
exceeded our expectations, and we believe with those we've managed to respect the value that was created, not alienate core fans, create growth in numerous ways, and deliver the returns and then some that we thought we would when we invested. We hope the same.
I have to ask about one other movie. So, Frozen.
Yes, before we do that, I will say that this week is Star Wars Celebration in Anaheim, which is a fan convention of sorts that we don't really run. It just runs, and I'm told it's a religious experience.
I've actually been to a celebration before.
I'm going, and we actually announced today that we're going to webcast it for fans around the world to see it, because the cast and the director of Star Wars: The Force Awakens, which is the first film, or the seventh film in the Star Wars storytelling, will come out in December, and we're showing them for the first time. I think it's a 1:27-second teaser trailer.
Another one.
That will be shown to them, and then it will come out with Avengers on May 1st in the United States. And I'm hoping that they're going to rise from their seats after they see this trailer. And I'm going to be there when they see it.
That's
probably in a costume.
As what? Are you Boba Fett or?
I haven't decided. I think I'll just be a stormtrooper, maybe. I don't know. You can't see my face.
So, speaking of another movie, Frozen, unexpected success. I mean, giant.
Yes.
Giant. I have to ask just the most inane question. Why do all the toddlers love Elsa? Anna gets no toddler love.
Well, let's be fair to Anna.
They love Elsa. All the costumes were Elsa for Halloween.
Wildly exceeded our expectations.
Sold out, right? I mean, you couldn't keep them on the shelf.
Couldn't make enough dresses.
A lot of parents.
By the way, the calls that I got from extremely important people in the world who had to have an Elsa dress for Christmas or whatever, it was fascinating. I'm sorry that I wasn't a dressmaker. I could have made a lot of money. I think if you look at that story,
but it did show.
Elsa was sort of the bad girl, even though she becomes the heroine at the end of the story, and because she had the power, and she was more the protagonist, and Anna was sort of the good girl.
but very perky.
Yes, extremely
toddlers
perky. And of course, Elsa had that great Let It Go number and that dress.
Well, I heard the parents, you know, because it's on repeat, they hate the song because they've heard it so much.
I'm not going to admit that, how I feel about that.
So I
We
want
should
to
let it go, I guess, right?
Right, let's let it go. You, some people say Disney Shanghai is going to be your capstone. That if you looked at the investments that Disney has made, the biggest investment it ever made was in ABC, almost $20 billion, then Pixar at just over seven, and third, supposedly, is the expense of Shanghai.
No, not supposedly. It is third.
And you say the castle is the biggest castle, you know, that it's going to surprise, delight, and amaze people as never before. Why so much attention, time, energy on this one park?
Well, first of all,
And money.
You're looking at China, the most populous country in the world, 1.3 billion plus people, and Shanghai, the most populous city in the world. And in 1998 or 1999, I was head of Disney International, and Michael Eisner gave me the task of paving a road, so to speak, to build a park in Shanghai. We were just developing and getting ready to build a park in Hong Kong, but my mission, the mission that I was given, was to plant a Disneyland stake in China. And so I started an exploration really with the government of China, really I guess in '99, that led to a 10-year negotiation, 10 years. That led to an agreement with the government of China that led to a groundbreaking that has led to a colossal construction job right now to take Disneyland, that iconic experience and brand that Walt Disney created, opened in 1955. In fact, we're going to celebrate the 60th anniversary. I keep mentioning George, but he was there on opening day.
He was
as
12
I
years
recall.
old, that's right.
But to be able to take Disneyland to Shanghai, to China, felt to me like not only an unbelievable accomplishment for the company, but what an opportunity. Because the Disneyland experience is where people experience our brand in the most immersive way. And so the connection to Disney and the characters and the storytelling, the experience
Needed to be local.
is so memorable. And I thought the only way China will appreciate Disney, yes, they appreciate Frozen, and Cinderella's a huge success there, and we bring our movies, and you can buy Mickey T-shirts and Elsa dresses, and some of our TV shows are available. The only way we could really, I'll call it embed the brand or plant the brand, was with a park. And so if there isn't necessarily going to be a book, but if I ever write a long story, I'll tell this story because I've dealt with 3 presidents of China and a few vice presidents and multiple party secretaries and mayors and other government officials, because the government's our partner. And we now, today, probably right now, we have probably about 12,000 construction workers living and working on the site, building a park that's going to open in about a year. We said spring of 2016. And my excitement is enormous. But there too, the responsibility is huge. We have got to get this right. And the charge that I gave to everyone there was, let's build something. People have said, well, what if you bring Disneyland to China? Is it the same as in Anaheim? What is it? What are you doing? And so I came up with these words because we needed a press release when we announced the deal. Let's build something that is authentically Disney but distinctly Chinese. And that's what we're doing. That became the mandate for our Disney Imagineers who really design this, and the stories in it, and the food, and the iconography, and the languages that we use, and the storytelling, and the experiences, and the creators. We have a lot of shows that are directed by Chinese artists, a lot of performers. So it will really be authentically Disney, but distinctly Chinese. There will be a castle. There will not be a Main Street. Main Street in our parks was modeled after a street in Marceline, Missouri, which is where Walt Disney grew up. Actually, he was born in Chicago.
That's right.
But I didn't think that bringing Main Street USA to
Right.
China in 2016
Made sense.
made sense at all. I thought it reeked a little bit of cultural imperialism, which I wanted to avoid. But they love Mickey Mouse, and interestingly enough, the government they want Disney, and the people want Disney. But we can't go in and not be respectful of, mindful of a huge amount of, I'll call it Chinese spirit and nationalism,
Right.
which includes pride in their own culture and a desire to own their own culture. Very, very tricky.
Yeah.
But I'm feeling good about it. But we have a lot to do still, a lot of responsibility.
I want to shift gears and ask you about some people. So the first person I want to ask you about is Steve Jobs. You ended up having a very close relationship with him.
Yeah.
And there's a new book that's out that says, for the first time, that 30 minutes before the deal was to be announced, the purchase of Pixar, he told you that his cancer was back, that he swore you to secrecy,
Yeah.
and that the only people who knew were his wife and doctors, and even his own children didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And I read, you responded, "Why are you telling me this?" What was going through your mind at that point?
Well, we had done the deal to buy Pixar for $7.3 billion. And I was obviously really excited about that, but fairly nervous. I was named CEO of Disney in 2005, and I became CEO in October 1, and my first board meeting as CEO, I actually broached the subject with the board of buying Pixar, which you don't quite do as in your first meeting as CEO, but there was a sense of urgency.
Right, because it had been a disastrous relationship before that.
We had a rough
the
relationship.
The wheels were coming off.
They were.
And you needed them.
We had a rough relationship with Pixar that had led to a lot of value, but was not only fraying, but announced that it was ending. And in I came, and I wanted to create a bridge with Steve in some form to see whether it's salvageable. And I had spent a few months trying to figure that out. In typical Steve fashion, he was trying to figure it out in a way that made a lot of sense to him and very little to us. And not quite in the same vein as bringing up with George the possibility of buying Lucas, but not all that far off. I called him one day and I said, "I've really got a crazy idea. We're trying to figure out how to keep a partnership alive. I'm thinking of something else." And he said, "What is it?" I said, "It's really crazy." He said, "Well, what is it?" I said, "What if we buy Pixar?" And there was a pause. I was actually really nervous. And they said, "Well, that isn't the craziest idea in the world. Why don't you come up and we'll talk about it?" And we stood at a whiteboard in the Apple boardroom for about 5 hours, listing pros and cons and getting into all kinds of things. And we ended up closing a deal. So that led to, I can't remember, it was January or February of '06, when we had done the deal. Our boards, Pixar was a public company that Steve owned 50% of, but our boards had approved it. We were gathering at Pixar for the announcement. We had called members of the press, members of the investment community, Wall Street, et cetera, to tell them that we were going to have a press conference, and he said, let's go for a walk. And I thought, he either wants more money, because I knew he was capable of asking, or he's changed his mind. And I was really trying to figure it out, well, what's in store? And we sat on a bench at Pixar, and he put his arm around me. I didn't really know Steve that well, but we had created a very quick trust that led to him selling, and he was becoming our largest shareholder, too. And he said that he had announced that he had had operable pancreatic cancer, which is rare, in 2004, rather. And he he was operated on. He announced publicly that he had been cured. And this was 2006. And he said, "I need you to know that my cancer has returned." And I was stunned, and I did say, "Why are you telling me?" And he said, "I'm giving you a chance to back out of the deal." And I looked at my watch, and I realized it was 12:30, and we were announcing it at 1 o'clock. And
Not a
our
lot of
boards
time.
know, and I'm Bob Iger. It's just me, meaning, and I thought, and he said to me, I feel that I'm about to become your largest shareholder, and you may not want to go forward with this knowledge. And I said, you need to tell me more. And he told me that no one had known. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, how long are you going to live? Do you know? And he said, I have a 50-50 chance of living for 5 years. And he said, but I am determined to live to see my son Reed graduate high school. So when does he graduate? He said 4 years.
You were very practical with your question.
The clock, there was this beating, there was this clock that was ticking very loudly. And then I'm thinking, you know, it was the post-Enron era where you've got all these responsibilities in terms of what you disclose publicly. And I can see all these things flying at me. What responsibility did I have? He says, I'm taking into my confidence, you can't tell anybody. Can I even say yes to that and go through with the deal?
But you did tell your GC.
I did. So anyway, he seemed so committed to living. I know that sounds really odd, but this is a guy we know was one of the most determined people in the world. At least I had seen that and known that. And I just believed in him. And I didn't know for sure, nor did he, but I thought if anybody's going to try to overcome this, it's going to be Steve. And so I said, we can't back out of the deal. I don't even know what what would I tell my board? I spent 4 months convincing him to let me spend $7.3 billion. And I say 30 minutes before, I'm sorry, cold feet, not happening? Couldn't happen without my telling the truth. So we broke up, walked back to our collective groups to get ready for the announcement, and I called my general counsel, and I said, listen, I knew it worked for me for a long time. I trusted him. This is between us. What do I do? Do we back out of the deal or not? And we quickly determined that we were buying Pixar, not Steve, and the assets we were buying were really Pixar and the films and the directors and their ideas and their technology and their building, and we agreed that we did not have an obligation at all to tell anybody, and we didn't.
So you were so close at one point. I read that he told his wife, I love that guy. And he asked you to take his seat on the Apple board when he died.
What happened was, I didn't know her half of the story, but he died in October of 2011, 5 years after we did the deal, 5.5. And there was a very small burial in Stanford or Palo Alto. And I think Steve must have done the invitation list of people who could go to the cemetery. And I was one of them. And we convened at a plot of land in the cemetery. I'm not even sure I'm allowed to say where it is. And Lorene asked whether people wanted to speak, and it was clear that I didn't have much of a choice. It's Steve Jobs' funeral, and I haven't come with prepared remarks, and I've got to talk. And I told this story about what happened that day as a means of describing him as a truly honorable person.
Right.
I had another story which was describing me as a truly crazy person, too. Did both. And when it ended, Lorene came to me and said, that night when you announced the Pixar deal, he came home for dinner, and we went through dinner, and at the end of dinner, she asked Steve, well, did you tell him? And he said, well, what do you mean? She said, did you tell Bob about your cancer? Because they had discussed, he had asked her permission, and he said, I did. And she said, can we trust this guy? We barely know him. And he said to her, this is her words to me, I love that guy. So that's where that came from. He never told me he loved me.
So when you were told he wanted you to take his seat,
well, he asked me before he died.
You can't say no, right?
Well, he asked me before he died. We had one of these memorable sessions. It might have been the last time I saw him alive. If I would join the Apple board, which I could not do while he was a member of Disney's board.
Right, because of
the interlocking boards, and they don't let that happen anymore. Right. Everybody gets too cozy, I guess. And so it was out of the question that I could join his board while he was on the Disney board. And he said, I'd like you to join the board after I go. And he gave me and I said, well, you're not going to make that decision. He said, oh, yes, I will. We had that discussion.
Different kind of governance.
I know. I was asked, so at the cemetery, Tim Cook, who was CEO, and the chairman of the board, Art Levinson, approached me and asked me to join the board then.
Wow, at the cemetery.
At the cemetery. But what I said to Steve was, so Steve said, but I've got, if you join, well, when you join, he must have said, I have 2 assignments for you. You might get a kick out of this being on a board or boards. I said, well, what are they? And he said, when I die, you can't let the board try to run Apple because you know boards can't run companies. And I said, well, thanks. Okay. I know that boards can't run companies, but I have never even been on the board of Apple. And I said, what's the other assignment? He said, well, Tim Cook is going to be my successor, and if he's not doing well, the board might be intimidated or timid about firing him because he was my choice. You need to lead the charge.
Wow.
So I said, on one hand, I'm his protector, on the other hand, I'm his executioner.
It's horrible.
It was, I've told Tim and the Apple board, it took me a while to have the guts to tell the board what my mission was.
Horrible.
Fortunately, I haven't had to do either. Tim has done a great job as
phenomenal.
the CEO of Apple, fantastic, and it's a privilege for me to be on the board. And the board is a great board, and they do know that boards have a role at companies that I think is really important, but you don't try to run a company as a board member or as a board. It just doesn't work.
I have 2 questions, and we have so little time. And I have so many questions, but 2 that are really important. So everyone's asking you the proverbial what's next. You extended your contract from 15 or 16 to 18, right? Mm-hmm. And you've had this phenomenal success, which we've already documented and talked about. And you've been imprecise in your answer, but so I'm going to ask it to you in a little bit of a different way. If someone came to you and said, you could be president of the United States tomorrow and not run, would you take the job?
Somewhere in this room is the head of communications for the corporate communications for the Walt Disney Company. She's saying, please do not answer that. Please, Xenia, wherever you are. I feel the force is with us, Xenia. I feel it wherever you are. Hypotheticals, are just that. I am stepping down, definitely, in 2018. By then, I will have been CEO of the company for 13 years, but president and COO or CEO for 18 years. I'm a big believer in change at the top, generating energy and new perspective, fresh air, no matter what I'm going. I do not have any plans at all. I've thought about what life would be like after Disney. I have a license plate, by the way, that says there's life after Disney. People get a kick out of. But I've made no plans. I don't really know. I don't really want to run another company. I couldn't think of another one that would be as much fun, for instance. And I don't presume to have the talent or the ability to be president of the United States. I've seen over time business people who think they can be govern and government people who think they can be business people. And there are a lot of times they're wrong. Not all the time, but a lot of them are wrong.
So let me ask you
So
this.
for me to, I don't know that I have the skills, the intellect, then I'll be 67 years old, the energy to presume that I could even do that job. And I've taken jobs that I knew would require my stepping up to the challenge, and I've been driven by that my whole career. But I have never presumed before I've taken a job or never known before I've taken a job that I could actually do it. And it would be wise of me to avoid making that kind of mistake in my life at this point.
So now as you sit here, and I know corporate communications is breathing a sigh of relief, right?
Probably.
What is your dream for yourself from this point?
I'll continue to dream. I hope that I will have a long time to do it. If I had dreams as a child, they were never to run the Walt Disney Company. They were to lead a fulfilling life, to lead a life that had challenge, that enabled me to satisfy what I think has been an innate and somewhat powerful curiosity, to enable me to prove to myself that I could do well and do good, to be able to raise children, have a successful marriage, and just generally enjoy life in a meaningful and
So you
fulfilling
can check
way.
all those things off. So now,
Well, there's some of them are works in progress. They're not over. I hope they will continue and improve. I don't know. In terms of new dreams, you know, when you run a company like this, as I'm sure a lot of people in the room can relate, or when you work really hard, it can be all-encompassing and occupy so much of your waking time and energy and thinking that I'm looking forward to a time in life where I have the freedom to play a little bit more, dream a little bit more, think a little bit more, even relax a little bit more, spend more time with my loved ones, pursue perhaps some other things that might excite me. But I don't know. I don't have plans other than hopefully to continue to lead a life that is thoroughly enjoyable, and that I fortunately have had the opportunity to share that enjoyment with a lot of people that I'm close with.
I think we all would say you've earned that right.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Iger.
Thank you. Thank you very much.